Hello everyone and welcome to another SheClicks webinar. Tonight we're going to be doing it on Zoom again as we did last time, and I'm going to try again in a moment to try and connect to Facebook Live, see if it'll let me do it, but Zoom and Facebook are having a bit of a fallout I think at the moment. Anyway, today I'm delighted that we're going to be hearing from Morag Paterson, who's someone I first met, we were just discussing this, back in, we think 2017 at the photography show. We met on a stand and had a nice chat, and I obviously looked up Morag's photography and really loved it. So I'm really delighted that she's speaking to us today. Hi Morag, how are you?
I'm really good, thanks. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. So excuse me if I look a bit distracted. I will be keep trying to connect to Facebook and looking up at my laptop occasionally to see whether there are any questions on there. But everybody who's logged into Zoom can raise their hand if they've got a question, and I can let them speak at an appropriate time. Now, it's usually best if we do that towards the end, if that's okay with you.
Sure. Yeah. If there's anything really burning comes up, then fire away.
Okay, well, if I see waving hands, maybe I'll ask. All right,
Yeah,
thank you
someone
very
jumping
much.
up and down.
Okay, over to you. Bye-bye.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for coming along tonight. It's lovely to have been asked to do this webinar by Angela. I hope you're all keeping well. I know we kind of say that as a throwaway remark a lot of the time, but it seems particularly relevant at the moment. And I know, you know, some of you are surviving lockdown better than others. So I hope anyway, this could offer some light relief and hopefully some inspiration. I'm an abstract artist, mainly abstract photographer, and I'm going to take you on a journey tonight that covers my photography right from the very beginning, for probably about 15 years ago, kind of through to what I was just doing 2 days ago. There's quite a lot of slides, but you know, we'll if it looks like we're running out of time, I can always just gloss over a few. So I'm going to start with a series called Impressions. This was a type of photography that when I started the very beginning of my sort of serious photography career, when it was anything other than just playing, I had no formal education or training in photography at all, so I was very much picking up the camera as I went along and seeing what would work and what I could do. My husband's a professional photographer who I work with, Ted Leeming, who some of you might well know. So obviously there was a lot of camera equipment hanging around the place, so it's very easy for me to pick up some good gear and start working with it. And I started off probably just mucking around in the garden a little bit, doing some work with flowers. And I was also quite inspired by the slow shutter speed water shots that you see a lot of in landscape photography. I loved the way that brought the movement through the picture with the milky blurring of the water. And so I very quickly kind of took that into the garden and was trying to photograph passion flowers blowing in the wind. And you can imagine with all the tendrils and the shapes of the flowers, you could get some really beautiful effects with a slow shutter. And although I kind of fiddled with that for a whole day, when I went back in and downloaded, I didn't feel like I'd actually caught the shot I really wanted to catch. So the next day I went back down again to try and start again, and there was no wind. So I thought to myself, what am I going to do here? And so I kind of messed around for a little while, moving the flower with my hand, but I found it was all kind of quite clunky. I had the camera on a tripod, of course, at this time. And so after a little while of faffing about basically with that and not getting anywhere, I suddenly just thought, why didn't I take the camera off the tripod and move the camera instead of waiting for the plant to move? And that was the beginning for us of 2 or 3 years of really intensive impressionist photography, or ICM, intentional camera movement, as a lot of people refer to it. This was going back 15 years or so, so there was almost no ICM work about. We certainly weren't aware of anyone. We did find a couple of people in the States subsequently who were doing it, William Neal and Freeman Paterson. So, but for us, without having any resources, we really had to self-teach ourselves. Everything that we know, everything we knew, everything we learned had to come from experience. Ted actually didn't get on board with it straight away because he's quite a traditional landscape photographer, and everything was very regimented, tripod, sharp, foreground, middle ground, background, etc. And so when I was coming in showing him these blurry pictures, he was just frowning at me going, what on earth is that? What's she playing at? But as many people know, I'm pretty stubborn, so I kept up with it. And eventually Ted actually came on board as well. And it led us down a road of, I think, 3 years solid almost of just playing with this technique. This is the first slide here is one of a landscape near our local village of Dalry. It's actually was our old dog walk in the house we used to live in. So we could go there every day, which was fantastic, and spend hours and hours trying this out. It was also one of those very cold winters where you get the beautiful hoarfrost and the soft light nearly all day long, which was an added bonus. And so, yeah, Ted, when he did come on board, he was kind of trying to emulate the work of painters quite a lot. Because he'd been done some art at university, etc. So he had that kind of background, whereas for me, I was very much just responding to where I was and what I was seeing, and hoping something beautiful would come out the camera. As I tell people when I'm teaching, though, these aren't an accident, these shots. You get the germ of an idea potentially through a movement or a light that could be accidental, but then you might be working through 20 or 30 iterations of almost exactly the same thing with just tiny adjustments of movement or shutter speed or position, and all of the reciprocal values between all those things to get to a shot that works. So we started joint signing our work through this period because we're both really competitive, and we realized that if we didn't take some joint responsibility for this learning process, and the fact that I could go and do something and Ted would go out and do it better later, then I might go out and do something similar better again. And so it didn't kind of matter who took the final shot. We'd both really contributed to the setting up of it or the practice of it, because we were learning from scratch. So we decided if we joint signed, there would be no kind of like squirreling your pictures away so that you could bring out the best one. We actually would learn a lot more by doing the sharing process. So that worked really well for us. So I'll take you through a few pictures. This is the lake at dusk in Dumfries and Galloway. To replicate these pictures where you have a kind of whole scene that you can see in an impressionist way, it's this is the one type of impressionist photography I think you really need light for. Some kind of beautiful soft light at dawn or dusk where the light's really bathing the land and you can just spread it around and soften everything up. And it's actually one of the hardest to do. And in the middle of the day, it's nearly impossible. I guess with a really big filter, you could do it, but sometimes then you just get so much movement, the picture becomes mush. So this is Clattering Shores, one of our local locks. This is back down on the river again, just almost the same spot as the Creamy Mountains one that you saw earlier, but just taking it exactly as the sun falls behind the horizon. So it's not burning out, but you're just able to take that bright orange and just swirl it around the picture with then the cooler temperature in the foreground. This is one example actually of using it in slightly brighter conditions. Obviously there was a dullness in the sky as well, and I probably popped a 1.2 neutral grad on for this as well to probably darken the sky down. And then the big swirl effect there you're seeing in the foreground is highlights on the water, which can be great for kind of drawing an image with. This one is it's one of the few indoor photos I've done, certainly up until very recently, and the only indoor one for the whole impression series. And this is lily petals, just as they've fallen off. You know, you've brought them in and you've had them in the kitchen for a week, and suddenly they get a bit sad and start falling off. But they also turn this incredible kind of translucent blue lilac color in places, which I thought would be perfect. So I just took a whole bunch of those petals and just popped them on a piece of newspaper in the kitchen, natural light, nothing special, and just worked around till I got something I liked. For anyone who's interested in the technical side of these, I know some of you are probably utterly proficient at it already, but for anyone new, I usually start off at about 0.4 of a second as a shutter speed, and then work from there to see whether I need a slower shutter or a faster one, or more or less movement. And I don't really worry about the aperture at all, because the shutter speed is the key factor. You may need to fine tune it in some circumstances, of course, but it's not the primary concern. So if you're only starting out, it's a really good idea to use a shutter priority for this. And then I think there's a little set of seascapes coming up. These are actually some of the kindest shots to try, I would say, to start out on if you're just wanting to learn, especially if you can go early in the day or late in the day where the light's beautiful but quite soft and there's some colour on the water. You know, because you can, with a fairly simple side-to-side movement, you can often get a reasonably nice effect. I think these three are all taken up just up on the Ayrshire coast, a little bit north of us. And this one's back in Galloway, and this is looking out across a bay kind of thing, from over a beach and back into a hill valley. And again, just using that difference in colour temperature, the sun going down and the cooler temperatures in the foreground. And then, of course, with everything, there's ways of making this image always feels much more gritty to me. It's kind of got some, what I would call mess to it, but it kind of works somehow. But this is just a riverbank, and this probably was shot in the middle of the day. Actually, you can kind of tell that it's got that brightness about it. And then just working with other types of subject, really. This is a bow wave of a boat. I think it was on the border of Poland and Slovakia on a biosphere visit for this one. I live in a biosphere here in Galloway, and it's so they were running some twinning trip with one in Slovakia. And so this is just, again, in the daytime, probably with a filter on, using the surface tension and patterns to create a bit of an image. And then bringing buildings in, the same riverbank in Dalry as many of these are shot on, and that's just a wee church there on the other bank of the river, and using all the reflections in the trees. And our local woods again, just shooting in the shade. There wasn't really anything too special going on with the light there. It was just using the difference between light and shade. And I always sort of really feel something when I see the dark lines of trees. Oh, this one's always slow to move on. And then the complete opposite, shooting a really vibrant, the bright acid green of a Sitka forest, again in the middle of the day, but you can see the lights behind the trees shining through, kind of leading that pathway. And it's actually a really good technique if you're surrounded by plantation forestry, because the trees are quite uniform, and they're actually a lot more colourful than they appear to the eye when you take an impressionist photo of them. So they can actually be quite a good subject matter to learn on as well. It was interesting when we were doing this, because we obviously we weren't aware of anyone. There could have been people doing it. So when we first took this out to exhibit it, I think we had an exhibition at the Joe Cornish Gallery that I think originally had been going to be more traditional prints, and so it was kind of Joe to let us just go a bit freestyle, and it got a very mixed response. There was a lot of frowning and mutterings about whether this was acceptable or kind of complete blasphemy in the photography world to be working like this. But we did go on to have exhibitions in Edinburgh and the Royal Scottish Academy, not whole exhibitions, group shows generally. This is just again bringing some built structure in, one of the bridges across the river near to us. I didn't really ever put much man-made stuff in these days, but you know, sometimes you just see something that you think really might work, or just be interesting anyway. I think the really crucial thing with this technique is to play. I'll say that all the way through this for every technique, but to experiment. And also, although there are the photos where obviously the light is absolutely crucial to get something beautiful and the effect you want, there's also a lot of things, especially in the middle of the day when the light's not kind, just very boring things like a pile of bamboo or some gravel, anything where there's a kind of uniformity to it can lead to a really interesting prospect. So it is very much worth experimenting and opening your eyes in a completely different way to you would when you're just, you know, out shooting a regular picture, because the subject in itself doesn't have to be amazing. It's what you can do with that subject. I set off someone just a month ago. She was doing multiple exposures and wanted an impressionist one to put over a normal one, or vice versa, and she'd never tried shooting with like just a pile of gravel on the road before, and she was off for absolutely hours once she started, because it gave such an amazing and unexpected texture. This was a shoot for a magazine actually. After a while the mags got quite interested and we did a few articles, and this was amateur photographer asked us if we would go and shoot in the city. So we actually just went up to Edinburgh for maybe just one afternoon even, and we'd never done it before either, so it was fantastic for us just to go and try something different. And we just shot separately for a few hours and just came back and put our work together. And then in the end, these are all single exposures, by the way, at this point in the talk. And at the end, as we were driving away from Edinburgh, I was just shooting from a moving car. Ted was driving. And I found this is one of them that gave some really interesting effects, because you had not only your movement of the camera, but the speed of the car, which gives you that sense of motion through the picture. And then this was just actually photographing a bus wheel, just playing. In fact, no, maybe it's a truck, because I think you can see one of those little wires coming up from the back there. But just shooting with quite mundane things and seeing how the motion really can bring them alive. This was just the roof of Waverley Station in Edinburgh, if any of you know it, and then you can actually see the image through it in the background. And I did, in the end, start introducing people, which I almost, you know, it's such a rare thing for landscape photographers to include people. But I did find that they could add something to a shot that you wouldn't always get without them. This is actually in Sardinia after a horse festival called Sartilia, and it was just everybody going home at the end of the night. So the green you're getting there, sorry to just zip back, is the kind of that sodium glow you get from the street lights. And I think this could be the last in the little impression series, although they'll keep cropping up because obviously it's something I stayed with. This is actually people foraging on a beach in Galloway, and I just was kind of drawn by the sort of ghostly shadows of them in the dusk. And it's something I would really recommend actually to play with people in these shots, especially in the woods. It can look great. It can really add an element of atmosphere, especially if they're wearing something that really contrasts with the rest of the shot. And you're just looking for a suggestion of the shape of a human. So after, I'm not sure, it was two or 3 years just shooting the Impressionist stuff, Ted and I actually built, not ourselves by hand, but we designed and project managed our house being built, which was an eco house in the Galloway Hills. And because we'd obviously had to get really immersed in all the environmental stuff to do the research on how to build this, when we finally got moved in, Ted said to me, why don't we do a project where we literally don't go anywhere? It's called Zero Footprint, and we just set the position we're going to photograph from, which was right in front of our kitchen sort of patio doors, and that's it. And this time I was the one who was kind of reluctant to come around, just because the way I photograph, it seemed really unnatural to do that and to only be presented with one quite wide view. But again, in the same way he came on board with the impressions, I kind of got on board with this. It's quite, because I'm actually sitting looking out over the view now, which is quite nice. So it is a beautiful view, and we're really lucky. It's a really wide view. It's kind of 270 degrees almost, I think, although my geometry isn't my strong point. But it's actually very difficult to photograph. There isn't an obvious composition that you just go, that's perfect, and could just shoot over and over again. This is what it looks like on a kind of average day. And so we've taken this photo and transitioned the exact same frame into something when the weather's more kindly. So we realised for this shoot that we were literally going to have to rely on weather, and luckily we do get some in Scotland. So, but you don't get this every day. And so we had these days where it was just this incredibly beautiful mist, and it would come in and out like a tide and be just weaving in and out, revealing one thing 1 minute, retreating, revealing something else. It's just exquisite days where you stood spellbound for hours and hours. And because we only had one tripod for this, there was a lot of times where, you know, one of you would be out photographing and just so immersed in it, and the other one would just be standing, kind of starting to bang on the window a bit, saying, it's my turn, get out of there. So there was a bit of that went on, but it was generally a really good time. I'll just go through a few of the pictures for you. We actually did a time lapse of this, which I think I shared on Facebook this week, which is also quite a nice way to see the weather in different types of seasons. There's some brighter days as well as these very misty days. And these shots are all one shot in camera, hardly any processing at all. So these are really what it looked like to us at the time. And just, you can see just the variety and the drama of the colour. It also turned into a kind of documentary for us, because we did this, the first part of the project we did over 5 years, which we made into a book, which you'll see a shot of in a minute. And then obviously we still do it now whenever we're here, but it's meant that we've seen a lot of environmental changes in the valley, which is really interesting for us. To be able, there was no intention of doing that at all as we started out, but it's become a great sort of side angle to the project. These are our kind of favourite trees just down below us. We only had a 70 to 200 lens when we did this, except for the bird ones you'll see in a minute, one Sigma lens. It's a really big lens. So nearly all of the shots here were just shot between a 50mm and a 70, and everything in the book was shot on that as well. I kind of, if I'd had my 400, which I have now, it might have been a really different matter. So these are the bird ones I was just saying about, and Sigma lentis, is it called the Sig Monster, they nickname it? I think it's a 300 to 800. It's a crazy big lens this size. Took me 3 weeks to even dare to take it out the box because it was so big. And then suddenly we were shooting with it thinking we'd be shooting distant landscapes, and a bird flew into the shot, and that was us. We were just away for a whole week of just shooting these chaffinches, mainly chaffinches, because we fed them anyway. They were already in the garden, and we just changed where we put their food just tiny bit to get the background right. And you can probably see a little bit with all these shots how the impressionist work kind of carried through here in terms of the style. just a few of the birds. That's the book, in case anyone wants to know what it looks like. We're actually doing a COVID-19 appeal with that, where if you donate to any COVID relief charity, £25 or more, you just send us a copy of the receipt and we will send you our book for free. I think we've got 31 left that we're doing that with. Just trying to find a way of helping when we're in the wilds. So that's just a little thing of the book. This is a shot I just took last week. Again, same project, Zero Footprint, from the same place. A completely different light. I was just up at kind of not quite dawn, because dawn's pretty early at the moment, but there was still soft light kicking around. And then the opposite end of the day, beautiful sunsets in the west. And you know, we do get some incredible skies here, and a lot of wildlife as well. We're very lucky. And then of course end up playing with some abstracts again. That's just the cars going past on the other side of the valley, and then the lights are reflecting in the loch, just again introducing an element of man-made. No one can resist the moon when it's up, right? So that's the strawberry moon from a few years ago, and it was just sitting really nicely under a bit of cloud. I think there could be the odd moon shot comes up in here. Just keep an eye on the time. Wow, whizzing by. So this chapter is called segment is called Seeing the Small. This is basically, I'll start off, because this is the sort of shot that I almost never ever take. I'm not a big wide landscape photographer. This one was literally handed to me on a plate by the weather conditions and the lie of the land. You know, so all I had to do is literally get out the car, pick up my camera and shoot that. Whereas if someone had said to me, go and shoot that, I would be hopeless. You know, so unless it's an absolute gift, it's not going to happen with me. 9 times out of 10, if I'm sitting on a big mountain or by an amazing waterfall in this case, I will end up shooting something that's on the ground, tucked away. And it could take me half an hour or an hour of sitting, doing nothing with my camera, just absorbing the landscape, just to, you know, for these things to pop out and for me to engage with them. Luckily that happens to me quite a lot, because I go out with Ted, who's quite happy to stand taking big shots on the top of a hill, and I'll just sit there enjoying myself until, you know, something pops up. So this was, I was just really drawn by the kind of translucent colours, just a maple leaf in the woods in autumn with some droplets on it. Again, this one on top of a huge mountain with a big view in the middle of the day. And it's just seeing this tiny little ice formation under the edge of a rock that had coated some grass. And it was just a delicate, beautiful little thing that it just drew me in. I think that most of my photography is because something just draws me in, as you'll probably hear more about as I go through. And then keeping up with seeing the small. The majority of my work really is water related. There's so few things that aren't. This actually was for a project for Velux. They were doing some, you know, kind of artists integration type thing. So I did do a project for them called the Daylight Project, which some of this work fed into. And then obviously because I'd got into this mode of working with water, it's carried on as well, and I'm, you know, I still shoot like this now. So this is bright sunlight, and that's a thing you can do with water in the middle of the day if you know, you kind of get caught and conditions might not be right for what you've planned to do. And it's just using the surface tensions and reflections of trees as a kind of polarizer almost, and just capturing it on a very fast shutter. So it's kind of the opposite to some of the other stuff I do. No movement with the camera in any of this. This is just letting the water and the surface do the work for you. This is, I can't remember if this one in particular is on my iPhone. There's a couple of these that I was really disappointed that they're on my iPhone, because I loved them. And people were asking if they could buy them when I posted them on Facebook, but they just, you know, you could maybe do a tiny print, but you wouldn't feel confident to sell something, you know, kind of big full size print. But I just love the just the crazy detail on there. It's just the surface of a small stream, that's all it is, and it's the water movement and a tangle of trees dancing across the top, creating all those patterns. It's a single exposure, no movement. As I said, probably on my iPhone. If not, then one of the next viewers. Again, the same thing, same principle. You just get a bit of the water, the colour from the bottom of the stream flowing through. I mean, you could use a polarizer, but I think it would possibly lose a little bit of the abstractness then, because obviously you're going to lose all the detail that you're getting on the top of the water. Again, kind of ditto, same principles. And then this is going off on a bit of a completely different tangent, just using the highlights on the top of the water to play with, and camera movement as well for these. But I'm so drawn to light shining on water. It's one of the things that really gets me excited more than anything. In any of its guises, you'll see a bit of this going through as well. You see, Michaela Griffiths is someone who does really beautiful work with this. And then just, it's not often I have objects in my water, but there was just something so still about that that really drew me in. It's probably the darkness and the negative space almost that really drew me in. Something about the soft tones and the leaves and the leaf fall and the pine needles. Kind of, I'm quite an autumnal person really, and that really appealed to me. That's a bit yuck on resolution, I think, so I'm going to skip over it. It's kind of almost like a still life of little bits and bobs in a puddle when it gets that oily sheen from the peat on it. But I'll try and dig out a better version and post it up on the internet. This is just tiny ice details on a stream. Again, just noticing details, small things. You know, this is a bit of water this big. It's not a grand waterfall or anything, just a tiny burn in a ditch by the side of the road, really. But, you know, just seeing the way the light can reflect in the ice, and the alternating texture between the ice and the water flowing through underneath really drew me in. And then I've done a lot of work where you just get really, really close to a stream, and you know, either whether like a little 50mm macro or 100mm macro, whatever you've got really, though, to be honest. A wide angle is probably tricky. I've used a wide angle about 5 times ever, and I don't think any of them are in here. So everything is shot on a 50mm or up, and not much on 50. So just getting really, really close to a stream, hanging over the edge of it, and just capturing the energy of those bubbles really is what, you know. And again, you've got the 3 textures. You've got the smooth water coming in from the top, then you get this massive excitement, and then the bubbles tipping out the other end. And yeah, so it's something I could photograph forever. This is just a tiny wee stream on a beach. You know, this is like this big, maybe, really, really tiny. And just again, getting your camera right into it, just finding a little place where there's a transition. I think the transitions are probably very appealing, and just watching the bubbles play. This one again is a tiny stream, and it's not really the best photo in the world, or even, you know, terribly appealing, but there was something about this that's a wall of water in the center, with the surface tension coming in that sort of the top 3rd line, and then it just went utterly flat and still to where it met the next bit of water, and I just couldn't get my head around it at all. And I mean, I guess it's probably, I can see it quite clearly because I was there at the time, but I guess it might be quite odd to try and interpret it from that. But anyway, it's just curious, and it was another thing about movement of water that drew me in. And again, just playing leaves in a moving stream. Again, more bubbles, and again, just this has got, you can tell there's a lot of autumn color in the water underneath, which is what's giving you those tones behind the highlights, and then the texture of the bubbles coming through. This was actually shot on a 1DX2, which Canon loaned me for a week or two. I do love that camera. It's really lovely. I still shoot on my old 5D Mark III though, because I just love it, and it just does what I need it to do. So this is just a ditch by our house, you know, really boring bog standard drainage ditch by a track. And again, just the light coming through, catching the pebbles on the bottom, and then you're getting that, and they're not beautiful pebbles, it's just gravel, and then the blue sky obviously floating down and lighting up the water. And then this is shooting those same bubbles that you were just saying earlier, but using the impressionist technique with them. So you're there's hardly any definition, and you're getting a much more kind of romantic feel rather than that textured pop of the bubbles, but exactly the same stream, probably near enough the same shot, just shot differently. Again, just looking through water using a kind of impressionist technique. Almost feels like a cave painting that was shot on the Isle of Arran. And then I just included this one just because the light was so amazing. I was just, again, it's a tiny wee burn, no bigger than a foot high, the waterfall. And it just lit up suddenly when I was there with this amazing kind of golden green light as it came through the spring trees. So I just popped it in because it's something a bit different. It's almost normal. And then just again, light on frozen water, a bit of texture and interest. That's on the same lake actually as the pink photo, the pink impressionist photo earlier in the series, but very different day. That's not come out very well, so I'll skip that. This is just you know, an idea on mucking around and experimenting and trying different things. I trimmed our olive bushes in Italy and was just had to have a fire. And there you have to watch your fire all the time, because obviously if the wind comes up and it catches, you set a wildfire off, and no one's going to speak to you for a long time. And so because I had to stand there, I thought, well, I might as well be photographing it. So I was just playing with impressionist pictures there. And I figure something I'll probably do again one day. That was just a kind of one-off random session. I just put them in because I like them for no other reason. They don't really, but again, it's just that thing of being up on a mountain with an amazing view in all directions, but that might not be the thing that for you gets you the picture that really kind of means something for you. And again, just, you know, a dandelion, just something on a hill with a bit of sun behind it, just a small thing that's easy to pass over. Although I did see some great dandelion pics on SheClicks today as well, so it's not as if everyone's underrating the dandelion. And then some bog cotton, just bog cotton and mist. I was actually I had a lot of work for a few years as a kind of landscape assessment photographer, which is just utterly technical, nothing creative about it at all. And I had to go up this Monroe before dawn to try and get a clear shot at the top, and I was just like, all the way up here I was just walking up in this mist like this, going, oh my, am I just completely wasting my time here with this really heavy 15 kilo pack on my back with all the panoramic head kit on it and everything. It did clear as it turned out, which was nice, but it was also, I thought, just from seeing this, just having this experience in the mist with the bog cotton, it would have been worth it anyway. Right, I'm going to stop whizzing a bit quicker because I'm just going to show you a little series now that are shots that we've taken from Iceland and the Faroe Islands. Most of our work, it is quite local, so this is the exception really. So we have been going up there running workshops and things, which we're not going to be doing after this year, but so this is the foreign the exotic section. So I've kind of mixed them up together, whether they're Iceland or the Faroes, just for the feel. And I won't talk too much over them. They're quite kind of self-explanatory. Just working with light on the water. And I guess a bit like more so than Scotland, these places are quite a dull light for a lot of the day, even well into May and early in the autumn. So you can actually get some really interesting work all day long. A lot of the whole first time we were in the Faroes, it was just snowing constantly. This was the only sort of hour we had where it wasn't, and you're battling the whole time. But there's huge, beautiful turquoise seas. This one's in Iceland. A lot of people will recognise that as the Black Beach. There's going to be a few from there. These are really recent, actually. I just it might be overcooked a little bit in processing, but there was this incredible blue streak across the top of the waves and along the front of the beach, which really drew me. This is shooting in the middle of the day when the conditions were awful for photography. And you'll see there's another little section on this in a while, but just playing with exposure. If things aren't working out how you like, I just underexposed completely, let everything go to black and take the texture on the top of the water from the highlights. And I've always wanted to do this shot as a great big full wall installation in an exhibition, where you have that middle section is a hole that someone can crawl into, and you end up in this completely black, silent, comfortable space. So there's this sort of beautiful experience of trusting, and then this utter comfort in the darkness. So I'm still working on how and when to do that. And then just more abstract waves. Some of these are tripod shot with a slow shutter, and then some of them, obviously, I've moved the camera a bit as well. But the sea is just so exciting there, just watching these layers and textures of waves coming in. That's the blue along the black sands. It's not actually showing very blue on this today. You maybe see that on social media, a bit more realistic. That's just a little harbour steps, again in the Faroe Islands, just going down to the sea, and a huge wave just washed over, and that's just the backflow into the water. And then playing with ice a little bit. It's just fascinating to see the ice bubbles that have been stored in that glacier, potentially, who knows how long, you know, what was happening in the world when that air got trapped there, and what little bits and bobs are moving about in the little tunnels and tubes. This one I put in because it's really not a perfect shot at all. The focus is really terrible, and it's just an example of we all get stuff wrong, or, you know, can't get things exactly how we wanted them to be at the time. But, you know, we can still like them as a photograph, and it can still have some value to us. You know, not least just for a scrapbook idea for future reference, if nothing else. So I always just kind of keep it in there as a reminder to myself as much as anything. And then could be the same piece of ice, probably not, just from a little bit further out. I just like the blue stillness of that. And then a few shots just shooting in snow. Really, absolutely love shooting in snow. I saw another photographer's work, I think, before I shot this. Just the softness that you can create with a bit of aperture blur and then snow in the background. And again, just snow in front of birch trees on that. And then tiny, tiny little lamb on the top of a pass. I rarely do animals, really, but there's just something so sort of brave about them being so high up in the snow, where they're just being such a young lamb. And that the kind of caring, the feeling that you get from the mother in that shot as she watches over her baby. This is one, again, just another shot in snow. I only took this probably 4 weeks ago. I'm quite obsessed with ravens. and love taking photos of them, and just to be able to see one in the snow. I would have liked to have got closer, obviously, but they rarely do what you ask them. And this is one, again, a shot I would never normally take at all, but just given that this was just before, you know, we all got locked down, and we were traveling, and it was a very strange time, and nobody knew quite what was going to happen. And obviously we live a lot of the time in Italy, so we were very aware of everything that was going on there. And so I did take this because it felt really poignant somehow. And it was the most beautiful snow I'd ever seen, you know, to be stood out in. And it wasn't too windy, you know, so it wasn't too difficult to shoot in the way snow can be sometimes. And because you had this tremendous dark grey sky behind it, you just could really feel there was something in the air that day. It was quite surreal, though, to be fair, because some Americans came up in their wedding clothes to take it. It's by a church, obviously, and some Americans came up and started taking, whether they were real or fake, wedding pictures in the church in the middle of all this, which did kind of change the mood a little bit. And then again, just the light from a glacier reflecting in water, a little bit of camera movement, a lot of camera movement, catching the sun's rays. A very rare shot from Iceland where you've actually got a great big dawn over the sea. And then just playing with going completely abstract, you know. I was at one of the big waterfalls and couldn't find any way to kind of frame a shot that was working for me. So I just always, if that is happening and I don't get frustrated, obviously I used to, and I kind of trained myself not to, and to either just sit down, put the gear down and not worry about it and just enjoy being where I am and just absorb it all and keep it as a memory instead of a photo. Or sometimes I'll just get the camera out and start doing something really quirky and just see what happens, really. And then this is at Godafoss. It's a huge waterfall again, but I wasn't getting what I wanted, but there was these exquisite little blueberries and their autumn colours down on the edge. So just taking some really more aperture out of focus type impressionist work, more so than movement. There'll be a little bit of movement in there as well, but a very defocused frame. And then again, a very un-Icelandic picture, but I think I was on a workshop and I wasn't seeing the big things that we'd kind of taken everyone there to photograph, but there's this incredible light coming through, so just playing with the delicate grasses. And that's the last one from this series, I think, with just letting somebody into the photo for once. It's quite hard to avoid them these days when you're there, so I thought, okay, well, instead of getting frustrated about it, just use them, you know, put them in the picture and see what happens. He's actually a little behind our heads on this one, so I don't know if people can see it or not. I don't have time. Okay. It's a whistle-stop tour of my career. So this is Ode to Pluto, and this marked a real change for us because Ted and I have been working collaboratively, joint signing almost all of our work up until this point. But it was getting to the point where increasingly we couldn't always kind of agree with what we were talking about. We were perfectly happy shooting, getting really great photos, but just when it come to curate them or collate them or make decisions or write about them, we were just finding we were on different pages, and it was making things quite difficult. Obviously being married as well, you know, you just don't want your work life to be, you know, having any impact on your harmony for the rest of the time. So we actually got a third party in, a kind of, I don't know what you'd call her exactly, kind of curator come branding come, you know, examiner of things. And, you know, we got her to sort of just take a really objective look at what we were doing. Because I think it's easy for anyone to lose their objectivity when they're working so intensely and for so long. And to sort of pick things apart for us so we could put them back together. And it was really interesting what came out of it. It just, for me personally, it gave me a lot of freedom because I think I'd unintentionally boxed myself into the landscape photography world. Whereas what I was doing was actually really abstract and certainly didn't fit into the very traditional landscape photography world. And I think, to be fair, it was probably a bit of a different environment then as well. Today, there's a lot of experimental work around, a lot of abstract work. You've got some fantastic abstract photographers around. And I would say it's a very much more incorporated discipline, whereas it wasn't for a while. And I think I'd sort of pigeonholed myself into that box and then wondered why I didn't quite fit somehow, if that makes sense. It's quite hard to quantify in words, actually. It's never my strong point. And so anyway, she picked it all apart for us, and I kind of realized that I'm much more kind of artist who uses photography as opposed to a photographer per se, where the kit and the technique and the planning and the attention to the actual photograph is crucial. Whereas for me, I'm out in the landscape or anywhere these days, and I just have a personal response to something that compels me to want to take a photo of it. And without that response, I find it hard to engage with it at all. And then once I do engage, I just get really deeply immersed in it. And so it was so liberating for me to just have that freedom as much as anything. And it sort of sounds crazy that I couldn't figure this out for myself, but it's true. Just to say, no, it's okay to do what you do. You're who you are. And so your story and your personality and your character is right for what you do, because how could it be otherwise? You don't have to be someone else. You don't have to be doing something the way someone else tells you to, because you would never be very authentic, actually. And that's why for me, why I could get really stuck, because I just hadn't found that utter freedom to express myself and just be very clear that this is who I am and this is why I'm doing it. And if that's wrong for somebody, that's okay. It's still how I'm doing it. It's not meant to be obnoxious or confrontational. It's just being completely comfortable that you are who you are. Anyway, so the upshot of that was, she said, this woman said to us, just go and, for me, shoot completely from your subconscious, but shoot every day. Just make sure you're shooting. Which I ended up taking this body of work. I'm just going to whistle through it quite quickly, because it's actually going to get featured on Inside the Outside group, if any of you know them, on Instagram over the next, from Sunday, I think. But it's really, you'll see it's very dark. And it was a real, it was all on my local walks. I would just go out and shoot anything that drew me to it. And I think, it was that real sort of psychological interrogation of belonging with nature and feelings of safety, or the opposite. And it's really still very hard for me to vocalize, because it was so personal and so introverted, I suppose. And I guess you can probably see that from the kind of darkness of the photos. This is just water in a boggy ditch. It's funny because Ted had always been saying to me, your photos are really dark, meaning literally they were just exposed a bit too dark, that back from way back when. And I was sort of always trying to afterwards overcorrect them, and I realized that probably my photos are just dark, and it's kind of how I take them and how I think about them. I am kind of one of those people who can be, like really bright and chirpy one minute, and then next minute much more sort of melancholy and contemplative. So I guess it probably shows through in the work. And I kind of ended that series on a much brighter note of this person standing in the light, which I felt like hopefully lifted out of that darkness. It's a much longer series than that. There's probably 12 photos in it, but obviously you don't want to see them all. And then just a very short set here of other ways of playing with exposure, more highlights on the water. The dandelions are back again. Just again shooting in the really bright sunlight, couldn't get any background that I wanted, or it's too messy, or, you know, it just wasn't working. So what can I do to pull this dandelion out? And I just thought, just blow everything out into darkness, the opposite of blowing it out. You know, and just have those spines of the dandelion there. And the same thing with this grass of Parnassus. It was in the middle of a really boggy field in the middle of the day, full of mess. And this was actually a sort of tribute to a friend of mine who'd always talked about grass of Parnassus when we were out walking. So that was kind of for her, and it felt right that it should have this deep black around it. And then you've got the absolute opposite of that is obviously overexposing. It can also make very interesting effects. Okay, just for a minute. So I'll whiz through these again. How is it all right for time, Angela, or are we?
Yeah, it's fine. I don't think anyone's going anywhere.
Oh, okay, cool. So I'm not. Okay.
No, it's fine. We haven't filled the internet, and I haven't got any plans. So
okay, everyone could go and pour themselves a glass of wine because I can't see them, and we'll just carry on.
I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
Maybe later.
Just turn your camera off. No one will see if you go. So you're doing some admin. So this series is, some of you might know, we actually emigrated to Italy, a few years ago now, maybe 2 years ago, almost full time. We still come back to Scotland every couple of months, and we're in Scotland now because lockdown. And it's also my kids are here, so grown-up kids, so it's nice to be near them. But so we have this place in Italy, in Liguria, which is just between Tuscany and Provence for anyone who doesn't know. Between Genoa and Nice would be another way of looking at it. So it's in the Maritime Alps, and then the Mediterranean is right in front of us, which you'll see as well in a few photos time. But I wanted to put this in because this is a kind of pretty typical day for me and Ted in the mountains. That's me, the little speck you can see with the dog sort of on about the right 3/4 of the way across. Ted was off doing a 400-kilometre walk, of course, across the whole of the county. And so every few days I would go and climb a mountain and find him and stock him up with some food, sometimes camp with him, or sometimes stay in a bothy, or sometimes just walk in. And because he went away with all these noodles, dried noodles, and then he just got really fed up with the noodles. He was like, I just need some proper food. So I would bake cook like loads of healthy stuff and take it up there. And this is just me and Zed walking off. Zed's the dog, by the way, having dropped his supplies off in the top of the mountain, walking off into the mist. It's just really fond memories for me. And again, just to give you an idea, I'm not really a mountain photographer, but that's just to give you an idea. That's the hill sort of just behind where we live over there. This is another exposure, sort of playing with exposure. It's the middle of the day, that's the sun. It's actually on Christmas Day one day at a place called, one year, called Passo di Mezzaluna, which is the Half Moon Pass, which is somewhere I just keep going back to over and over again. Not necessarily to take photos, but just because it's such a cool name more than anything, and it's an interesting place. I can actually walk there from my house now. It takes several hours, but it's nice to be able to do it on foot. And then I was actually, I don't know if that might be a bit low res. I was a bit worried when we moved to Italy because I'm such a northern orientated person. You know, I've always loved Scotland. I'm from here, even though it doesn't sound like it. I've always loved, you know, I've loved going to Iceland, I've loved going to the Faroes, and it's always been the north that's held romance for me. I haven't really ever had much longing for anywhere further south. And so when we ended up in Italy, I was really worried that photographically I just wouldn't find anything to do. And I couldn't have been more wrong. The sea down there is absolutely incredible. Just the light on the water. This is pre-dawn light. I just done something as mundane as dropping Ted off at the train station for an early meeting he had to go to, and I just thought I'd just go and sit and watch the sea for a bit, and I took some photos, and I realized you got this incredible light that I just couldn't have expected. That is with some camera movement as well. And again, evening light. None of these are messed about with, by the way. It's a terrible expression. But they're, you know, they're just ICM. They're not multiple exposures, and there's been no kind of extra saturation. If anything, some of them are a bit desaturated because the light's so crazy. And yeah, so I'll just go through a series of these. They're just quite peaceful, I suppose. That one's in the middle of the day, actually, but facing away from the sun into the sun in the middle of the day, especially if you've got just that was a 1.2 filter. Actually, you know, you can still make that work and get a slow exposure, especially on quite a long lens. Again, just a bit of ICM. Beautiful evening light on the water. It's just so common there. It's almost I never like to say guaranteed, but so much more so than in Scotland. I mean, in Scotland you'll get a dramatic, beautiful, moody light, but there, if you get up at dawn or you go to the water at dusk, you can be almost sure you're going to get some sort of beautiful colour. Hence, you're going to see quite a few wave shots for a second. Some of them are in the middle of the day, actually. The light in this photo on the water is actually reflected from the buildings along that stretch of coast in Italy, and even in the villages. Are amazing, these beautiful pastel colours. I didn't really shoot them, but if you take a look at Ted's work at any point, you'll get a really good idea. He does some amazing abandoned building photos there as well. And then you can still get that beautiful blue green that you see up in the Faroes in parts of Italy as well, especially after a storm. And just some more ICM shots. I started because I was shooting waves so often, and for hours at a time. I started playing with trying to make landscapes with the shapes and the shadows and the waves. So I would try and capture the wave, you know, as its peak darkness just before the crest comes over, and use some camera movement as well to try and create a sense of a landscape within the wave. So I think there's a few might not have been despotted. Or that one. Yeah, just working with that to try and do something different or inventive. Again, the same thing there. Just trying to create the look of land. And then, yeah, you just get absolutely bonkers light there. So that's just the waves coming in again. You've got the dawn light on the one side of the wave, and then the silvery shadow on the other side coming towards you. It's not really a perfect photo, but I just wanted to, you know, collect that colour and light somehow. And again, not a perfect photo. I've actually got a video of this that I prefer, that shows the movement of that gold transitioning into silver and rolling towards you. But I didn't dare put any video clips into this presentation because I didn't know how Zoom or let alone Facebook would deal with it, or the bandwidth of Dumfries and Galloway. And then there's all sorts of possibilities there. This is just looking straight down into the water. There's some amazing pebbles. And then the green is the colour of the water, and the distorted shapes is the distortion of the pebbles through the water. And you can, again, be lost for absolutely hours, you know, because every one of them comes back with a different shape, and that makes you think of something or someone. I just put that in. It's another tribute photo. I seem to be collecting them, of a nice time I spent photographing some yachts of someone who's not here anymore. And that was a real sky. I've never seen anything like it before or after. And funnily enough, I again just dropped Ted off at a station, different day, and was coming back, and and the sky just lit up like that. There is a name for it, and every time someone tells me, I just forget it. But again, it's not, you know, it's not a killer photo in any way, but it's just a case of having a record of having seen something like that. And then because we're this is a zero footprint too, which is from our Italian place basically. So it's just a few photos. We've only lived in the place we live now since maybe like 15 months or something. The last 3 months of which we haven't lived in it, so 12 months. And again, I didn't really have any expectations. I just wanted to move somewhere where I could see the sea. So we're 800 meters up a mountain, so 2,500 feet roughly, and about probably 15-20k from the ocean. So a lot of these are shot on my 400 lens, just off the balcony at the house. And I couldn't imagine that I was going to be getting this sort of light coming across the water. But you know, you just get there and you get surprised, and it's beautiful and amazing and very lucky. So just looking across the water, this is actually, you're going to see Corsica soon across here. You can only see it in the winter. In the summer you almost don't see it for months on end, and then suddenly it just pops out. So I've jumped the gun a bit on saying that because it's obviously a couple of slides away. This is just watching a storm. We get so many storms. I debated whether I could put one of Tad's pictures in here or not. Just this unbelievable lightning storm with multiple forks right across the sky. And this is obviously one clearing out across the water. And then just another, these are all sunrises. The sun sets away around the corner where we can't really see it, even in midwinter. But it's nice to wake up and have this to kind of start your day with. This is a classic where I couldn't decide on the format, so I put both formats in. So that's the full frame, and you get these layers of the sky coming right into the middle of the image, but then there's a panoramic, which is somehow cleaner and tidier. So I'm sure we all have these dilemmas all the time. And yeah, I haven't figured that one out yet. It's photographically, it's probably the panoramic, but emotionally, it's probably the 3x2. Different shot. Now you can see Corsica, so that sort of thin line, if you can see hopefully just on the horizon, is Corsica, and it's a long way away. I think it's it's either 160k or 160 miles. Whatever man's around me always tells me, puts me right. I always say it wrong. And anyway, it's a really long way, and it's really surprising that you can see it. And then you'll see one in a second, hopefully. No, that's just another one of the light on the water. The beautiful clouds we get there too. This is Corsica. So the front line in this shot is the foreground, as it were. Obviously I'm shooting on a 400, so it's compressing everything. But so it's mainland foreground in the front, and then the hills behind are Corsica, which is however many 100 miles away, let's say, just to be fair, but probably a lot more. And so it was just unbelievable to me that I could see that so clearly with the lens across the water, you know, and to be actually able to see some of the detail and the texture on the hills. And that's a bit of a murkier sort of distance. We get a lot of these tankers out in the water. There's just a softer light than usual. Again, just interesting atmospheric stuff going on all the time. And then, you know, it's nice to play with stuff that's much closer as well for the same zero footprint thing. So you're standing in the same position pretty much. And there's this beautiful eucalyptus tree that grows over our balcony, and, you know, we can just shoot into the light as the sun comes up when it's covered in raindrops and get some interesting things. And this was just collecting things from the woods right under the window, so it's gone completely different tangent, but it is more, again, something I could collect from that same within a few meters of the same spot. I found a dead jay and collected its feathers, and there were these hibiscus petals, all over the driveway, which reminds me of the lilies shot from years ago. So I just put them together and made a little kind of homage to them, really. And then I just chucked that one in because I've just never seen clouds like I saw them that day. That's just shooting from our balcony again, and it was as if you're in a completely different world somehow, sort of above and in between and below. So in case you thought that was all getting really too traditional for a while, I've put a few projects in that I've just been working on over the last couple of years. I won't go on too long. These 2 photos are from a set of 3, and these are multiple exposures now. And I just wanted to say that for me, when I do multiple exposures, I don't do them in camera. I know a lot of people do, and they're really diligent about it, which I certainly was utterly diligent when I did the ICM, that nothing was being done on the computer. It was all one shot in camera. But when it came to working with multiple exposures, I've played a little bit with doing them in camera, but it hasn't really gripped me. Although I love the work that I see other people doing. I really love it. I've seen some incredibly impressive stuff, and you'll all have seen Val Bailey and Doug Chinnery's work, which has just pushed the level so high. So these ones for me, they're actually made up of photos that I've collected over about 2 years. I've quite often found now, because the way my brain works, it's very abstract. I don't just kind of set a project and do it. I'll be wandering all over the place and I'll have lots of different thoughts. So I might be thinking about something over a period of 2 years in the case of this, not really knowing how I was going to articulate it. And then suddenly one day I just sat down to the computer in about half an hour and was like, boom, that's it, done. And it was so Bad Algae it's inspired by my sister, who's a marine scientist who specializes in poisonous algae blooms. And obviously there's a lot of environmental work that goes on about them, because they're actually really important influences of our air quality. And we're obviously adding a lot of pollutants into the watercourses, which can cause these bad algae blooms. So this photo and the next photo I just made up of there's dead things in both. I think dead things that I'd found either on beaches or in puddles. There's a frog in this one and a fish in the other one. They've got elements of nature, and then they've both got pollutants in. And I just built them up for an exhibition, and I made them into small prints. So it's probably the first published multiple exposure stuff I did. This was going back a couple of years now, I would say. And I'll just show you a few others that I've played with in the meantime. This was actually only last week, because my lockdown multiple exposure, just a couple of ICM shots, 2 overlaid with each other, and then I think I put colour burn when I decided what type of what I was going to apply to the second layer. And it's quite hit and miss, what works and what doesn't, but I quite liked it. This is a whole bunch of photos of Old Man's Beard. The hedgerow is absolutely full of it in the forests in Italy, and you get those beautiful seeds, the frothy heads as it goes into autumn. And I just took a whole load of photos of them with the sun shining through, and they were quite nice in their own right, but I don't know, I just felt like playing with them, and so I just overlaid a few of them, and then I think I inverted it probably by the looks of it. It wasn't that long ago. I should be able to remember, but I'm getting old. And then this was just a river I'd been photographing just up the road from here, a walk I was doing in a house I was staying in literally half a mile away. And the gold through this is a birch log in the water with the sun really shining on it, so it gets that amazing lit up goldenness to it. And then the overlay is just shots of the water bubbling around it, and then obviously one of the adjustments as I've put the layer on, and it just kind of reminded me of the cosmos, which if I ever see the cosmos in a picture or a subject, it always really draws me. I really want to go somewhere and explore it a bit more. This is a really recent one as well. I'm just doing some work on peat at the moment, peat bogs and their importance. A lot of our work's taken on a very much an environmental tint, really, over the last, since we did Zero Footprint 1. So this is just a detail of a peat bog with icicles, which really drew my eye, overlaid with a picture of the sea from the same place. Lizzie Shepherd's just done a really interesting article on peat, if anyone's interested in reading a bit more about that. That's just some rocks and texture on an overlay. It's lost a bit of its colour on the screen here. So then we did a residency, both of us, which was an artist residency in Dumfries and Galloway, which if anybody wants to do it and can do it, I would thoroughly recommend. It was amazing. They applied for funding to Creative Scotland. This was through Upland, our local arts organisation. They got the funding, so then they can basically say to you, right, you've got this many days. I think it was nearly a month, and obviously you always do more than you were signed up for, but you're happy to. And you know you're getting paid for it, and you know that any time you spend on it is time well spent, and justified in some way, which is very much the opposite way round to how we often work as photographers. You know, we're often self-generating work, which we're hoping to exhibit or sell, or we're going off to teach people afterwards. You're not very often paid up front and told you can do what you want and interpret it how you want. So it was a really good experience. We had two other artists, or was it three, working with us. I think there was another artist and another intern, all across different things. He was a sculptor, and we're obviously the two of us doing photography in various ways. And it was a great chance for me to get into exploring cyanotypes. I've sort of had it in the back of my mind to try for a while, and then sort of this was a perfect thing where I could just go and buy some materials and start experimenting and see what would work. If anyone else wants to look up more cyanotype stuff, I really recommend, I can never say her name properly, Marianne Linus, is that right? Anyway, I can look it up if anyone doesn't know her and wants to know her name, because she's done some really beautiful work with it on the Wirral. This is just a hydrangea flower exposed on some photo speed paper coated with their emulsion as well, and that's all hand coated. You can buy pre-treated stuff, which can be a bit easier if you're just starting out. This was my main piece that came out of that exhibition. It's a good 1.5 meters high by 1 meter wide, maybe. And what I basically did, we had a lot of community engagement. I can't remember if I said that at the beginning, where we would go into like the men's shed, or we'd go into the schools. We would work with a youth group. I did an artist walk with locals. And so all of that fed in. It was important that it fed into what our outputs were. And so for me, in the end, this is every river from every tiny little tributary, anything that's big enough to appear on an OS map across the whole catchment of the Galloway Glens, which is where we live. I forgot to say that the subject was the hydroelectric scheme. That's probably a really key part of the information here. Which is right outside our window, one of the dams, but it stretches for about 30 miles up and down the valley, with obviously this huge catchment and all these locks. So I traced everything onto this acetate and then made this huge cyanotype of it on fabric. And it was a really, really interesting and quite emotional piece to work on, because so many of those rivers I've walked along, had experiences in. I've been there when I'm pregnant. I've been there when I'm with my kids. You've been there when you're together with someone. You've been there when you're very much separate from someone. You've been there with friends you've lost. You know, I've had 25 years of my life here, and so much of it is around those waterways. So there was a lot of kind of emotion went into that piece. It actually ended up, somebody came and bought it at the opening, which was nice, and then they donated it to one of the local art places, which was lovely. This was another set from that same exhibition, multiple exposures again, of a stream. The stream, they drain these big bodies of water in front of the dams every few years. And so the whole lot gets sucked away into this tiny channel, and there's all these mud zones. And I was just really taken with this little stream that normally is buried under, I don't know, 20, 30 foot of water. And then suddenly they drain the dam and it gets its chance in the air to kind of exist again. So I kind of use them as a bit of a metaphor for the kind of human interaction with the planet at the moment. There's one's called In the Beginning, one's called Uproar, and one's called Beyond, which again is probably quite relevant at the moment. A couple of tiny things left, I think. So this was just a couple of, you might have seen these on Instagram. I think I posted them up yesterday, just playing around with solar graphs. It's just a couple of them I've got here. If anyone doesn't know, this is where you take some light sensitive exposure and leave it, light sensitive paper, and leave it exposing outside. In this case, I cut open a beer can, put the light sensitive paper, and you put a pinhole in and just tie it or tape it to something. And so that's basically tracking the sun going over the sky. And I think that's spring to autumn. So you can see the different equinoxes. You can see the difference of the height of the sun, etc., in the sky. And I think there's just another one. I just put these up at various points around the house. I've only got two here. But it's a fascinating thing to do just as an experiment. You know, it takes you no more than an hour to set it up, and then you just leave them for 6 months and bring them in. If you do try it, look it up though, just to get the fine tuning tips, because there's a few kind of pitfalls to it. And what you need to remember is it's essentially, you need to scan the photo that you take out of the tin, keep it out of the light and scan it, and then invert it to bring the colour back. This is just a installation I did. I found, I forgot to mention, it was one of the really key things that for me, it's quite easy to get into a rut with your photography, or to get bogged down in the digital and the screen, whether it's the back of the screen on your camera or the screen in front of you where you're processing or sorting or trying to market whatever it is with your images that needs to be done. And to go hands off for a while, so things like the solar graphs, and the cyanotypes is just such a useful way of downloading a bit of that and being a bit more grounded, and then maybe going back to your photography with slightly fresh eyes. I mean, they are types of photography anyway, but you see other people doing it. I do work with mixed media. You'll see, anyone who knows Doug Chinnery's work, he's doing a lot of painting at the moment, and that's really interesting to see. And Isabel Kurds as well, I saw, was doing a lot of painting recently, and it's a really great way just to reboot almost, I would say. So this is just one shot I've got. It probably doesn't make much sense in isolation. I did an installation in Dumfries, which was a physical installation commissioned by the Stove, I think. And it was in response to a woman called Kathy Hines' work called In Flight, which if you get a chance, check it out. It's she does really cool stuff. And so I did a physical installation where I made a whole thing in an alleyway full of flags with people printed onto them, and then just sort of took abstract photographs of it. There was a longer story behind it about bird and human migration, but I'll leave that for another day, or you can always, you know, email me or ask or look on the website if you'd like to hear more about it. Just another example, I don't know if this slide's going to come up. Another way of collaborating, I've put a few collaborative things just here towards the end for you to see, just because there's also huge benefit if you want to get out of your rut in just working with somebody else from whatever discipline. This was a friend of mine, a close friend, and she would write me haikus when I was away in Italy, and I would be sending her photos. They didn't have to relate to each other, but there was this flow of a sense of conversation between them. And we've just made them into a little book just for us, which was just a beautiful thing to do, really. And again, it's just, we're often not very good as writers. I'm not speaking for everyone, obviously. Some people are great photographers and writers. I'm not one of them. So it's nice to be able to team up with with somebody who writes beautifully as well, to add something to your photos. Complete other end of the spectrum collaboration. I promise I'm nearly finished. This was, I can't remember what the technical term for them is these days, street artists. They're called Recoat anyway. And Upland, our local arts organisation, teamed 3 sets of artists up with 3 street artists and did a rural mural and a city mural in Glasgow, Berlin and Newcastle, and then 3 in rural Dumfries and Galloway. So this was the one we did in Glasgow, and it was fascinating to work with them as well. It's such a different work process, but then some real crossovers with photography as well. So I would go out and take a load of photography of a region or the places where we were and have ideas about it, and then they'd also take photographs, and then they'd convert them into these amazing geometric, I don't know if you call it that, shapes, but also with themes behind it. Was exchange and breath and wind were in ours. And they would do that, or get it all in Photoshop and overlay it and plan it, then grid it out. I mean, you can see how tall that building is, it's huge. And then we had to go up and paint them, which was a huge learning curve for me. And I'm scared of heights, so being at the top of that on a cherry picker was, it was challenging as well, but you could kind of overcome it. And again, I just threw these in for the reason that just getting out of your comfort zone and doing something different with somebody who does something different can be a hugely rewarding experience. 2 more things. This is an Arts Territory exchange residency, which I'm doing right now with a lassie in Alaska called Katie Iona Craney. Again, look her up. She does fantastic work. She's called @Deciphering_Change on Instagram. And so we've been talking a lot about journeys not travelled. How can we try and experience each other's places, not just literally through seeing photographs of them, but how can you actually get a sense of travelling or experience a landscape without going there. We started this before everybody got locked down and nobody could travel, so it was quite interesting that halfway through it, everybody's now in that same situation. I also thought it could have implications and ideas for people obviously who can't travel for whatever reason, either because they're ill or they don't have enough money, and also for people who can't see or can't hear, I don't know. So we're just exploring that. We haven't made a body of work. This is just 2 photographs at the moment, where she sent me some photos from Alaska and I've overlaid them with photos I've taken from Scotland, which is a real literal interpretation of trying to exchange those spaces. But it was just to give you an idea of the sorts of things, and also just to say watch this space, because I'm quite excited about how it'll turn out. And then literally this is what I did last week, so I'm gonna finish. This is because of the whole environmental thing. I sort of got to a point in the road where I thought, okay, I want to try and do something from absolute scratch, where I'm not using any new resources and I'm not using any chemicals, and I'm almost not buying anything, although inevitably you're going to buy something in a process almost always. So I decided to make anther types, which is exposing photographs or contact prints using a plant emulsion, and I decided to make the paper to do them on. So this is what I've been doing for the last couple of weeks. So this paper is actually just recycled. So I've taken paper scraps from around the house, envelopes, newsprint, just anything that was paper basically, and mushed it all down and whizzed it up and made paper, and added a bit, bits of grass and plant petals as well, which does make quite a pleasing paper. And then I decided I wanted to go the whole hog, and I spent, I don't know, more than a whole day stripping the inner bark from willow trees. We've got a lot of scrub willow here. And so I don't feel too bad taking it, because if I take a little branch off it, it's going to grow two back in the same place. They're very sturdy, shall we say. So I had no idea how long this would take me when I started, or that I probably couldn't have contemplated it. But it was also quite therapeutic and mindful to do, just stripping out all this inner bark, cooking it, mushing it, and then finally making paper, which turned out a little bit more rustic than I'd intended, as you might be able to see from that. And that's the detail of it on the right with the light shining through, so you can see it's also got holes in it, which isn't ideal for paper. These two were just a little happy chance thing on the way. I'd made this plant emulsion from cabbage water, red cabbage water, which I've used to tint the cyanotypes before as well, which was really interesting. And it had frozen a bit in the fridge. And again, when I took it out, it suddenly had the light shining off it. And so I got distracted for a whole hour just taking photos of that with my little 100mm. Even got a tripod out, which was very unlike me. And then these are the anther types from the garden. So I took the paper. These ones here are actually on bought paper, because the ones on my paper are still exposing. So they're brushed. You dip the paper in the cabbage water and let it dry out in the dark, and then you lay your plants or contact print, or if you an object, or you can use a digital negative or positive if you want to expose a kind of true photograph, and then you leave it in the sun for as long as it takes. It can be weeks, but because it's just been solid sun here, really bright, and we've got long sunshine hours, it hasn't actually taken these this long to do. And so the rest of the paper gets bleached out around it, and you get left with an image of what you've been playing with. So I've got these are red cabbage. I've also got red onion skins, orange onion skins, coltsfoot, and dandelions. Really just whatever I had lying around or growing outside. But if you ever want to try it, you'll see there's a whole load of stuff you can use. You can use coffee. There's quite a lot of kitchen stuff, turmeric, that's possible to use. But it's quite an interesting thing to play with. And anyone who's got a garden, if you're stuck at home over the next few weeks, it's quite a pleasing, low maintenance. If you don't go and try and make the paper to do it on, it's quite an easy way to go. And then that's it. That's my last slide. I usually have thank you written on that, and thank you for staying with me for so long. I didn't realise it was going to be quite that long.
It's been great. I mean, it's fascinating to hear your insights, but also, just going through so many images and such a breadth of them as well. Really interesting. If anyone's got any questions, they just raise their hand. I can switch on talking so they can ask a question. While people sort of get to grips with that, I was just going to make an observation, which is going back quite some way with there was some shots of autumnal scenes. And
yeah.
I think leaves were on a pond or
yes.
what really struck me about that actually was, although it was absolutely autumnal, it wasn't the full-on autumnal colours. And you said sometimes you do knock back the saturation a little bit. And I wondered whether that was one of the images where you did that, but I just really liked the fact that it was a very subtle colour.
I think that's what drew me to it, that they were that subtle. I mean, I could check whether I knocked it back a little stage further, because often once you've seen something that draws you like that, you do go a bit further. But I'm pretty sure the reason I took it was because they were slightly subdued. I think they were upside down, a lot of them. You know, on the flip side, they're often just not quite as bright, are they? And I think that is partly what attracted me. There was just some utter stillness to it that I couldn't really, you know, I'm not very good at vocalizing what draws me to something. But
okay,
should I stop sharing my screen, Angela?
Yeah, okay.
Does that work for people?
Yeah, so no one's raising their hand at the moment, but everyone's saying what a great talk, so that's good. Now, focus is obviously a very important aspect of photography anyway, but a lot of your imagery is about very restricted depth of field, or focus which is from traditional terms slightly off, you know, to get that because you're more interested in the defocus. And I wondered how you achieve that. Do you primarily shoot in manual focus so you've got complete control, or do you?
I used to shoot in manual absolutely all the time, but for the last couple of years, my eyesight's just been getting a bit dodgy, because I'm short-sighted anyway, so I compensate for that, which was fine. But now I'm getting the long-sighted and short-sighted. So in my, and I'm finding it a little bit hard to get the diopter, and you know, sometimes I think I've taken something that is absolutely clear, and I get back and it's not. And I haven't quite resolved everything around that yet. So at the moment, I am relying on auto a bit more than I used to. Okay. Obviously, if I'm shooting the abstract stuff, I just switch it off most of the time.
Yeah.
On a stabilizer.
Have you tried what they call multifocal contact lenses? Have you tried those?
Yeah, I haven't yet, because I'm also trying to wean myself off contacts. So, which lockdown's a great opportunity for. But no, I haven't. But I do need to do something about it, because I am finding that I can't, and there's nothing worse than not being able to rely on your own eyesight if your career is like.
I tried them and I find them really, really good for photography, but things like this, I just use reading glasses.
Yeah.
So. Yeah. So Liz Hammond wants to ask a question. So Liz, if you want to ask a question, I
should be unmuted now. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent. Hi, thanks for really interesting. Sorry, always coming up with questions, me. But I'm just interested in, from the sort of abstract, like the ICM photos.
Yeah.
Do you find that you shoot less as you go on, or are you in terms of like choosing, like I hate to use the word hit rate, but that's the sort of thing that I mean, because I find as I've done them, the more I've done them, the less I have to shoot to get what I'm after, but I still have to shoot a lot to get what I'm after, if you get what I mean. I
totally get what you mean. Yeah. No, it varies. I would say the hit rate's a lot better, actually, because you've just, over the 15 years, you learn so much about what might work with a given subject. It doesn't mean you don't have to always be open to changing or trying something different, but it is much easier to achieve what you want. You know much more quickly what you need to do with your shutter speed to improve something, or is it your movement you need to change, not your shutter speed. A certain type of movement will suit a subject over another one, and so I would say it does get an awful lot quicker, because it is one of those things, you'll know yourself if you've tried it. When you're first starting out, you have to shoot so many.
I've been doing, I think, probably 10 or odd years now, so to start off with, it was like hundreds and you might get one, and now it's maybe 50 or 20, I don't know, depends on what it is. But
I'd agree. I mean, and also it gets easier for me because I've obviously taught it for years and years now as well, just trying to to get across to somebody how many shots and how carefully you have to work through every one of those tiny changes every time to perfect something, because a lot of people take 10 and think they've taken loads and walk off, whereas they might have to take 50 or 100 to, you know, I even say once you think you've nailed it and you think you've got the exact shot, you've nailed your movement, you've nailed your shutter speed, you should be taking 10 at that point, doing exactly the same thing, because one of them will be more perfect than the others, because there's always some random thing that you know, with the movement and everything, there's always going to be something random in there.
It's very difficult to tell on the back of your camera. I always find it looks very different when you get home.
Absolutely. And I've got a loop now, which I would say has been really, really helpful with sorting out just being able to get a slightly clearer idea. I mean, it's my favourite thing in my bag, actually.
Oh, wow, okay.
I've only got a cheap one as well, just 30 quid or something off Amazon. I didn't sort of splash out on it. But it's incredible.
Oh, okay, that's a good idea. Thank you.
For all sorts of images, actually, just to be able to get a bit of clarity while you're out in the field.
Thank you.
Sarah Beard would like to ask a question. Sarah, you should be able to be heard now if you want to ask your question. Maybe you need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, still some mute signs.
Well, I think I've unmuted myself now.
Oh, away you go.
Yeah. Oh, excellent. I think you've probably answered partly my question. Is when you're out in the field and you're doing your ICM, are you very disciplined in your movement, or are you, do you let yourself go and just move your camera how you feel?
There's a little element of both. Certainly when we were sort of teaching ourselves the technique right at the beginning, I had to be really quite free, because I didn't know how many different movements there were that could create different effects. Now I'm quite disciplined, because I know a certain type of movement will create a certain type of effect. So, but I'll still go through the process, if you see what I mean. So if my movement to begin with isn't right, I'll adjust it and you know, because for example, going like this, a shaky little shudder will give you a more impressionist sort of textured piece. But if you feel like there's too much texture, you could make a long in and out movement. And likewise with the side to side. You know, I always used to say to people, keep your elbows in, because actually you're dragging light around and you want to frame that you're not bringing something in from over there on the right that you didn't want in your shot. And keeping your elbows in can be a really good way of doing that. But it can also make your shot feel tight. Whereas if you let your elbows go a bit, you're going to have a softness to your movement. So it really depends what you're shooting, I think. What I always used to say was try and reflect what you're seeing in the type of movement you do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Hope that helped.
Linda Wern would like to ask a question. So Linda, you should be able to be heard if you just unmute yourself.
Hi, Linda.
Looks like you're unmuted, Linda. Maybe you need to turn your volume up.
There's something different in the way it's displaying her name underneath the little icon, I think. See how Liz Hammond and Sarah Beard have got their names in the middle and that one's sitting off on the bottom left?
No, they both look exactly the same for me.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they all look exactly the same. Okay.
Maybe pop it in the chat, Linda.
Yeah, try that one. So when you were talking about how you shoot, obviously, you know, I review cameras, so I am quite a kit person, but it occurred to me, you mentioned using your screen. Do you tend to shoot with your viewfinder or do you use live view?
Always a viewfinder. I almost never use live view. There's certain situations where I'm trying to think when I would use it. There have been certain times, sometimes doing those macro images over a screen, but it's less than 1% of the time, I think. I've just got so used to it, you know, to using the viewfinder, but maybe with the eyesight, it would be sensible to have a look at using the live view. I know I tried Ted's, sorry.
Sorry?
I was going to say, I know when I try and shoot with Ted's Sony, with its, the way it works, I just can't make, it just doesn't function for me at all, because the muscle memory is so completely different. You know, he'll hand it to me sometimes I've lent my camera to someone else and I want to grab something, and he'll hand it to me, and 2 minutes later I just go, no, honestly, I don't need that. And it's just learning, you know, it's just slight laziness, and but I'm not good at doing new stuff with you know, it takes me ages to even take something out of a box. So,
so it did occur to me that the sort of
now.
there's
yes.
Linda.
Go for it.
Hi, you actually answered my question. I had an answer before we even started, but I'd just like to explore it a bit more. Just before I do, just on the contact lens thing, I have one long-sighted and one short-sighted lens, and that seems to work quite well if you want to just explore that.
That's a good idea. No, I should give that a go, yeah.
Sorry. But I was going to ask you if you consider yourself more of a photographer or an artist, and in fact you answered that question. But what is it that, what's different? You said a little bit about techniques less important than the emotion that you feel about a shot.
That's a really good question. I would, it's so difficult, even though I've sort of pondered this for ages. It's probably just for me that my work is very expressionist, if that makes sense. I interact with the landscape, I have an engagement, and then there's an expression of that interaction. So I'm never normally looking to straightforwardly document something, which much photography is documenting in a way, no matter how artistically. Does that make sense? I'm saying this off the top of my head, so I'm hoping I'm not coming out with something I'm going to listen to another day and wish I'd never said it. But you see what I mean? So, you know, especially for Ted, he thinks about something he's going to shoot, and he goes out and shoot it, and also he can look at a space and know straight away what the best way of representing that space and documenting it is. Whereas for me, if I went out to shoot one thing, there's almost zero chance I'll shoot that. Something else will have caught my eye and I'll have gone down an avenue with that.
Oh, that's very interesting. I've only just got into abstract photography, and I'm doing a course, and I'm just about to write a review, and my question is abstract photography really art? So that was why I had the question already ready for you. Wow. But it's interesting what you've just said about the feeling, because I am a little like you, and I think that's possibly why I'm never satisfied with straight photographs.
Yeah. I mean, it's a subjective question for me, because, you know, I'm so utterly immersed in the whole sort of abstract and expressionist thing. But, you know, it's interesting. I'd never seen any of the work by the abstract expressionists until I was well down this journey. And it was only I went to one of those exhibitions in London where they had them all in one space. I suddenly just felt like, oh my God, now I understand a little bit more about myself and what I'm doing, because suddenly it was verbalized, you know, by others in terms of what was actually happening. And I mean, it's not to say that more straightforward photography isn't art as well. I don't know. Angela, you might have been at the Sebastian Salgado talk at the photo show. It might have been the same one where I met you. Yeah. He said this brilliant thing that's really stuck with me about how photography isn't just the subject, it's you and everything you've experienced in your life. It's all of your history. It's possibly even part of your ancestors that have passed down to you, who you are through them. It's that whole combination of who you are in your existence and your subject, which is what adds a level to it, that means that two people never stand there and take the same photo. Obviously, some people are emulating a photo, and then they might take the same thing, but, you know, left to your own devices to interpret something, no two people would ever shoot something exactly the same properly.
Thank you. That was really interesting. Very good. Yeah,
Anyway, it's a long.
I love your work. It's absolutely fabulous.
Oh, thank you. That's really
I
kind.
first got into it through a local artist. I live in Northumberland.
Right.
A local artist called Andy S. Gray, who does Turner-esque interpretations of the Northumbrian coastline.
Wow.
It's quite, so that's where I first saw it and first got into it, and then I did a bit of intentional camera movement, and that's about as much as I've done. So it was really interesting to hear some of the techniques that you're using. I did some manipulated some calotypes in Photoshop, but I've been thinking about trying them. So thank you very much. Lots of things that you've said, it's really inspired me. So thank you very much.
Oh, great. Well, good luck. I hope it works out for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, take care.
Thanks, Linda. Jan Beasley has asked, what was the name of the exposure for the exposures using plant dyes and the red cabbage? You know,
what was the anthrotypes?
Anthrotypes.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
There seems to be a definitive book on it. Tim Parkin recommended it to me, and it's from the States. I had to order it from the States. You might be able to get it here, but it's just called Anthrotypes, and it's very interesting. It's got a lot of detail in it, but also it's actually quite straightforward, and it's, you know, so if anyone wants to just ping me a quick question or an email or whatever, I'm very happy to just send the basic thing over.
I really like the idea of making prints from red cabbage.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you can do, because with the cyanotypes, you have to bleach them and then tint them back. But with these ones, you just use the cabbage as the emulsion. Again, this is something that came out of the residency with Katie Craney in Alaska. She was commenting on someone else's post on Instagram about lupine emulsion. And just those two words together, lupine emulsion, just sent me into like, oh my God, what is this? I've got to find out about it. Because I love, I just love plants and herbs and scent and color. And so, yeah, and then I, got speaking to Tim about it, and he showed me this book. So I just thought, right, that's my next experiment.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you've been talking for a long time now, and you've held everybody gripped. So I think you've probably deserved a drink.
Yeah, maybe.
But thank you ever so much. It's been inspiring to hear you, and also to see your images, and everybody has really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. And I'm, really happy if people want to ping me an email with any, questions.
Great. Thank you very much. It's been
You're
great.
very welcome. Thank you very much for having me. Good night, everybody.